Samuel McKnight stood at the edge of his property, watching the morning sun paint the Montana mountains in shades of gold and orange. At 32 years old, he had built a successful ranch from nothing but grit and determination. His cattle dotted the rolling hills, and his farmhouse, though modest, was sturdy and warm. Yet something was missing from his life that no amount of hard work could provide. The loneliness had been growing stronger each winter. When the snow piled high and the days grew short, the silence in his house became almost unbearable. He had tried to court the few available women in the nearby town of Cedar Falls, but they all seemed to want the excitement of city life, not the quiet routine of ranch living. Most were intimidated by his rugged lifestyle and the isolation that came with it. That was when Samuel decided to place an advertisement in the matrimonial section of newspapers back east. He had seen other men in his situation find happiness through correspondence with women seeking new lives out west. The idea felt strange at first, but desperation and hope eventually won over his pride. His letter was simple and honest. He described himself as a hard-working rancher, 5 feet 8 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. He owned 300 acres of good land, had a comfortable home, and could provide well for a wife. He was looking for a woman who enjoyed the outdoors, could handle the challenges of frontier life, and wanted to build a family. He mentioned that he was not much for fancy words, but promised to be a faithful and caring husband. The responses came slowly but steadily. Samuel read each letter carefully, but most of the women seemed to have romantic notions about the West that did not match the reality of his daily life. Some wanted adventure and excitement. Others seemed to think ranch life would be like a permanent vacation. Then came a letter that was different from the rest. Catherine Morgan wrote from Philadelphia in a clear, practical hand. She explained that she was 26 years old, had been working as a seamstress since her father died, and was tired of the crowded city life. She had grown up helping her grandfather on his small farm outside the city and understood the demands of rural living. She could cook, clean, sew, and even help with animals if needed. What struck Samuel most was her honesty about her expectations. She did not want romance or adventure, just a stable life with a good man who would treat her with respect. Their correspondence continued for 6 months. Through their letters, Samuel learned that Catherine was intelligent, practical, and had a quiet sense of humor. She seemed genuinely interested in his descriptions of ranch life and asked thoughtful questions about everything from cattle breeding to vegetable gardening. Samuel found himself looking forward to her letters more than anything else in his week. What he did not know, and what Catherine had carefully avoided mentioning, was that she stood 6 feet and 2 inches tall in her stocking feet. She had learned early in life that her height intimidated men and made them uncomfortable. In her letters, she had described herself simply as tall for a woman, and left it at that. She hoped that once Samuel got to know her through their correspondence, her height would not matter as much. The decision to marry came naturally after months of letters. Samuel proposed through the mail, and Catherine accepted. They agreed that she would travel to Montana in early September when the weather would still be good for traveling and she could settle in before winter. Samuel sent money for her train ticket and waited with growing excitement for her arrival. He spent weeks preparing for Catherine's arrival. He painted the inside of the house, bought new curtains for the windows, and even splurged on a real mirror for the bedroom. He wanted everything to be perfect for his new bride. The townspeople in Cedar Falls were curious about the woman who had agreed to marry the quiet rancher, and Samuel found himself the subject of good-natured teasing and advice. The day finally arrived when Samuel was to meet Catherine at the train station in Cedar Falls. He put on his best shirt and jacket, combed his hair carefully, and drove his wagon into town. His hands were sweating as he waited on the platform, holding the small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning. The train whistle announced its arrival long before the black locomotive came into view around the bend. Samuel's heart pounded as the train pulled into the station with a great hissing of steam and screeching of brakes. Passengers began stepping down from the cars, and Samuel scanned each face, looking for the woman who matched Catherine's description of herself. Then, she appeared in the doorway of the passenger car, and Samuel's world seemed to stop. Catherine Morgan was indeed tall for a woman. She stood head and shoulders above every other passenger, her auburn hair pinned neatly under a simple hat, her gray dress practical but well-made. She carried herself with quiet dignity despite the obvious stares she was receiving from other people on the platform. Samuel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Catherine stepped down from the train. She looked around the platform uncertainly, clearly searching for someone. When her green eyes met his blue ones, she smiled tentatively and began walking toward him. With each step she took, Samuel became more aware of just how dramatically she towered over his own modest height. Catherine stopped in front of him, looking down at his upturned face with a mixture of hope and anxiety. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wildflowers in Samuel's hand seemed to tremble slightly as the reality of their situation settled over both of them. Catherine broke the silence first, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. McKnight? I am Catherine Morgan." She extended her gloved hand, and Samuel noticed that even when she bent slightly forward, he still had to look up to meet her eyes. Yes, Samuel managed to say, taking her hand briefly. "Welcome to Cedar Falls, Miss Morgan. I hope your journey was not too difficult." "The train was quite comfortable, thank you," Catherine replied, though Samuel could see the worry in her expression. She was studying his face carefully, probably trying to gauge his reaction to her height. Around them, other passengers were collecting their belongings and greeting their own parties, but Samuel felt as though he and Catherine were standing in a bubble of awkward silence. Samuel cleared his throat and held out the wildflowers. "These are for you. I picked them this morning." The bouquet looked tiny in Catherine's large hands, and Samuel felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "They are lovely," Catherine said genuinely, bringing them to her nose. "I have not seen wildflowers like these since I left my grandfather's farm." "What are they called?" "Indian paintbrush and lupin," Samuel answered, grateful for something practical to discuss. "They grow all over the hills around my ranch." He paused, then added awkwardly, "Shall we collect your luggage?" Catherine's belongings consisted of one large trunk and 2 smaller bags. Samuel was relieved to have something to do with his hands as he loaded them into his wagon. Several townspeople had gathered to watch the proceedings, and he could feel their curious stares and hear their whispered comments. Catherine seemed to sense the attention as well, and kept her eyes downcast as she waited. The wagon ride to Samuel's ranch took nearly an hour, and for the first half of the journey, they rode in uncomfortable silence. Samuel kept glancing sideways at his bride-to-be, still struggling to process the reality of her size. Catherine sat straight-backed beside him, her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the landscape with apparent interest. Finally, Catherine spoke. "Your letters describe the mountains beautifully, but seeing them in person is quite different. They seem to go on forever." Her voice carried a note of wonder that Samuel found appealing. "Wait until you see them in winter," Samuel replied, feeling somewhat more at ease. "They turn white as far as the eye can see. Sometimes you cannot tell where the mountains end and the sky begins." "I imagine it gets very quiet then," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat," Samuel confirmed. "Some people find it too quiet, especially folks from the city." Catherine turned to look at him directly for the first time since leaving the station. "I think I might like the quiet. Philadelphia was always so noisy, with carriages and people and machinery running day and night. Sometimes I would dream about a place where I could actually hear birds singing." This gave Samuel hope. Perhaps her height would not matter if she truly understood and appreciated the life he could offer. "There are plenty of birds here," he said with a small smile. "Sometimes too many. The crows could be a real problem for the crops." As they approached his ranch, Samuel found himself seeing it through Catherine's eyes. The house looked smaller than he remembered, and He worried that she would find it crude compared to what she was used to in Philadelphia. But when Catherine saw the neat farmhouse with its fresh paint and the well-tended garden beside it, her face lit up with the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "It is perfect," she said quietly. "It looks like a real home." Samuel helped Catherine down from the wagon, and once again he was struck by her height. She did not need his assistance, and could have easily stepped down on her own, but she accepted his offered hand with grace. Standing beside the wagon, she was nearly as tall as he was while he remained seated. Inside the house, Catherine moved slowly from room to room, taking everything in. Samuel watched nervously as she examined the kitchen, the sitting room, and, finally, the bedroom he had prepared for her. The house felt cramped with her in it, not because of her width, but simply because of her height. She had to duck slightly to pass through doorways, and Samuel realized with growing dismay that the ceiling in the bedroom was barely 6.5 feet high. "I am afraid the house was not built for someone of your stature," Samuel said finally, unable to ignore the obvious any longer. Catherine turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw a real sadness in her eyes. "I should have told you in my letters," she said quietly. "I know my height is unusual. I was afraid that if you knew, you would not want to marry me." Samuel studied her face, seeing the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "Why did you think that would matter to me?" "Because it has always mattered to everyone else," Catherine replied with painful honesty. "Men do not want wives who tower over them. It makes them feel less like men, I suppose. I have been told many times that I am too tall, too imposing, too much. I had hoped that perhaps a man who lived alone on a ranch might be different." Samuel felt a flash of anger, not at Catherine, but at the men who had made her feel ashamed of something she could not control. "Those men were fools," he said firmly. "A man's worth is not measured by how tall he stands compared to his wife." Catherine looked surprised by his response. "Do you truly mean that?" Samuel considered the question seriously. Was he bothered by her height? Yes, it was unexpected and would take some getting used to. Did it change how he felt about the woman he had come to know through her letters? That was a more complex question. Over the next few days, Samuel tried to adjust to life with Catherine. She was everything she had promised to be in her letters: hard-working, practical, and pleasant company. She cooked better than he had eaten in years, organized his chaotic household, and even helped him repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. But her height remained a constant reminder of how different their situation was from what he had imagined. The practical problems were numerous. Catherine had to stoop to work at his kitchen counter, and she bumped her head on the low-hanging lamp in the dining room twice the first day. The bedroom ceiling was so low that she could not stand fully upright, and Samuel caught her rubbing the back of her neck more than once after particularly long days. More difficult than the physical challenges were the social ones. When they went to town for supplies, Samuel could feel people staring and whispering. Some of the comments he overheard were cruel, suggesting that he had gotten more than he bargained for, or making jokes about who would wear the pants in their family. Catherine pretended not to notice, but Samuel could see the hurt in her eyes. Their planned wedding, scheduled for the following Saturday, began to feel like a mistake. Samuel found himself wondering if he was being fair to either of them by going through with it. Catherine seemed to sense his doubts and grew quieter each day, though she continued to fulfill all her duties with determination. The breaking point came on Thursday evening when Samuel returned from checking on his cattle to find Catherine sitting on the front porch steps, crying quietly. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, quickly wiping her eyes, but he had already seen her tears. Samuel approached Catherine slowly and sat down on the step beside her, though even sitting down she was still slightly taller than he was. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "I think I should take the train back to Philadelphia," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is not working, and I can see that you are unhappy." Samuel felt something twist in his chest at her words. "Is that what you want? To go back?" Catherine was quiet for a long time before answering. "No," she said honestly. "I love it here. I love the mountains and the quiet and the way the air smells like pine and grass. I love working in the garden and helping with the animals. But I cannot stand making you miserable just by existing. You are not making me miserable, Samuel said, though he knew his words lacked conviction. Are you not? Catherine turned to look at him directly. You can barely look at me without flinching. You avoid standing next to me. In town, you walk 3 feet away from me, as if you were ashamed to be seen with me. I may be tall, Samuel, but I am not blind. Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks because he knew she was right. I am sorry, he said quietly. I've been acting like a fool. No, Catherine said, shaking her head. You have been acting like a normal man who got something very different from what he expected. I do not blame you for that. I blame myself for not being honest from the beginning. They sat in silence again as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Finally, Samuel spoke. Tell me about your grandfather's farm. Catherine looked surprised by the change of subject, but answered anyway. It was small, maybe 40 acres. He grew vegetables and kept a few cows and chickens. I used to help him every summer when I was a child. He taught me how to milk cows and collect eggs and can vegetables for winter. What was he like? A small smile appeared on Catherine's face. He was a tiny man, barely 5 feet tall, with a big white beard and hands that were always dirty from working in the soil. But he was the strongest person I ever knew. He could lift feed sacks that weighed nearly as much as he did, and he could work from sunrise to sunset without ever complaining. Did your height bother him? Catherine's smile widened. He used to joke that God had given me the height he meant to give him, plus a little extra for good measure. He said I was built for bigger things than the city could offer. When I started growing taller than the other girls and felt awkward and strange, he would tell me that tall trees catch the most sunlight and produce the strongest wood. Samuel found himself really looking at Catherine for the first time since she had arrived. In the fading light, he could see the strength in her shoulders and the grace with which she held herself despite her size. He thought about everything she had done since arriving, how she had worked alongside him without complaint, how she had handled the stares and whispers in town with dignity, how she had tried to make the best of a difficult situation. I've been thinking about this all wrong, he said slowly. What do you mean? Samuel stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at his land. I've been so worried about what other people think about how we look together that I forgot why I want a wife in the first place. I was lonely, Catherine. I wanted someone to share this life with me, someone who could appreciate what I've built here and help me make it even better. He turned back to face her. In your letters, you sounded like exactly the kind of woman I was hoping for. And you are exactly that woman. You just happen to be taller than I expected. Catherine stood up as well, and again Samuel had to look up to meet her eyes. But this time, instead of feeling diminished by it, he felt something else, a kind of pride that this strong, capable woman had chosen to be here with him. The people in town will always talk, Samuel continued. But they talked about me before you arrived, too. They said I was too set in my ways, too rough around the edges, too focused on work. People always find something to criticize. The question is whether we are going to let their opinions decide our happiness. And what do you think? Catherine asked quietly. Samuel took a deep breath. I think I would be a fool to let the best thing that ever happened to me walk away, just because she can see over my head. For the first time since her arrival, Catherine laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that Samuel found he wanted to hear again and again. When you put it that way, it does sound rather silly. There are some practical things we will need to figure out, Samuel said. The ceiling in the bedroom is too low, and the kitchen counter is not the right height for you. I can duck, Catherine said with a shrug, and I can work at any counter height. I have been adapting to a world built for shorter people my entire life. No, Samuel said firmly. You should not have to duck in your own home. I will raise the ceiling in the bedroom, and I will build you a proper counter in the kitchen. This is your home now, and it should fit you. Catherine stared at him in amazement. You would do that? Catherine, if you stay and marry me, I will build you a house as tall as you need it to be. I will stand on a box to kiss you good night, if that is what it takes. I will let every person in Montana know that I am proud to have you as my wife." Tears appeared in Catherine's eyes again, but these were different tears. "I thought all my life that I would have to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's world. You are the first person who has ever offered to make the world bigger to fit me." Samuel stepped closer to her, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look in her face. "Will you marry me, Catherine Morgan? Not because of some arrangement we made through letters, but because you want to build a life here with me." Catherine reached down and took his hands in hers. Her hands were large and capable, with calluses from years of hard work, and Samuel thought they were beautiful. "Yes, Samuel McKnight, I will marry you." Their wedding took place the following Saturday as planned, in the small church in Cedar Falls. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Samuel wore his best suit. When they stood at the altar together, the height difference was obvious to everyone present, but Samuel noticed that Catherine stood tall and proud, no longer trying to diminish herself. During the ceremony, when the pastor asked Samuel to place the ring on Catherine's finger, he had to reach up to take her hand. Some of the wedding guests chuckled quietly, but Samuel smiled and said clearly, "I am honored to marry the most remarkable woman in Montana." After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the church. Samuel noticed that Catherine relaxed visibly when several of the ranch wives approached her with genuine warmth and curiosity. Mrs. Henderson, who was barely 5 feet tall herself, looked up at Catherine and said, "My dear, you must be wonderful for reaching things on high shelves. I have been standing on chairs for 40 years. Tom Bradley, who owned the ranch neighboring Samuel's, clapped Samuel on the back and said, "You are a lucky man, McKnight. It is clear that your wife has more strength and grace than most people half her size." As the months passed, Samuel kept his promises to Catherine. He raised the ceiling in their bedroom and built her a kitchen counter at the perfect height for her to work comfortably. He also built shelves and cupboards that took advantage of her height, making their home more functional than it had ever been. But more than the physical changes, Samuel found that his perspective had changed completely. When they went to town together, he walked proudly beside his wife, no longer caring about the stairs. When someone made a comment about their height difference, Samuel would smile and say, "I married the best woman in the territory. I would be a fool to care about anything else." Catherine bloomed in the acceptance and love that Samuel showed her. She became active in the church and the community, and her practical skills and kind nature soon made her invaluable to their neighbors. When illness struck the Thompson family that winter, Catherine was the first to arrive with food and help, and no one cared about her height when she was nursing their sick children back to health. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Catherine said, "Do you ever regret it? Marrying someone so different from what you expected?" Samuel looked up at his wife, who was mending one of his shirts in the fading light, and smiled. "Every day, I thank God for that train platform in Cedar Falls. If you had been the woman I expected, I might never have learned what I was really looking for." "And what were you really looking for?" Catherine asked. "A partner," Samuel said simply. "Someone strong enough to build a life with me in this place. Someone who could see the beauty in simple things and find joy in hard work. Someone who could teach me that love is not about fitting together perfectly, but about choosing to build something beautiful together despite our differences." Catherine set down her mending and reached over to take Samuel's hand. "I love you, Samuel McKnight." "And I love you, Catherine McKnight," Samuel replied. "All 6 feet and 2 inches of you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars appeared in the vast Montana sky. Two people who had found in each other something more precious than they had ever dared to hope for: acceptance, partnership, and a love that was strong enough to tower over any obstacle.